Good evening or afternoon. Very good to see all of you. If you'll excuse me, I've been trying to keep my iPad as closed as much as I can today. I've got 20% battery left, so you may enjoy a short sermon this afternoon. We'll see how it goes. But very good to be back with you again this afternoon, looking at this heroine of faith. Before we do that, though, I do want to mention, and probably should have mentioned this morning, that this week, of course, we are building up to our Purpose season, and next Sunday being Purpose Sunday. And those will be going out in the mail this week. Monday we'll be sending out those Purpose cards. And, back to something that Jesus said at one point. He said, you've got to really think this through before you decide to be my disciple. You've got to think about what it's going to cost you. You've got to think about whether or not you can meet the demands. And he said, a guy over here building this building, he doesn't start doing that without knowing if he can do it or not, if he has the funding and the materials to build that building. This guy over here that's going to war against another king, he has to sit back and think, well, I've got 10,000 men. Can I beat the man with 20,000 men? And so Jesus teaches this principle. Well, we do that as a church. We want to take on some ministries in this upcoming year. We want to maintain some ministries that have been happening. And the eldership here, the church as a whole, we want to sit down and think about what do we have to meet those needs in the upcoming year. And it's a bit of wisdom and stewardship. And so the way that we do that is with these purpose cards. We're all going to say, this is what I think. This is what I plan to give in the upcoming year, and then the eldership will sit down and say, okay, that's what we have to meet these needs. Anyway, that will be going out this week, and we'll be talking a little bit more about purposing in next Sunday's lesson. But tonight we are talking about Sarah, mother of a nation. Now, I didn't say Happy Mother's Day. I feel like I should. This is the kind of lesson that you would have on a Mother's Day Sunday, but the text has taken us here. The text itself has brought us to a mother, and we're going to talk about the way that she became a mother in faith. And so, by the nature of the text, we're talking about mothers this evening. I want to just mention a couple of quotes that you might enjoy. I found these on the internet concerning mothers. You can probably relate to several of these. Buddy Hackett said, my mother's menu consisted of 2 items. And I think some of y'all have these same 2 items. Take it or leave it. Peter DeVries said, a suburban mother's role is to deliver her children obstetrically once and by car forever after. Phyllis Diller, this is sweet. Phyllis Diller said, I want my children to have all the things I could not afford. Now, I know several of us have said that at some point in time. We want our children to have better than what we had. She said, I want my children to have all the things I could not afford. Then I want to move in with them. Abraham Lincoln. All that I am or ever hope to be, I owe to my angel mother. George Washington, all I am, I owe to my mother. I attribute all my success in life to the moral, intellectual, and physical education I received from her. Napoleon Bonaparte, let France have good mothers, and she will have good sons. These last 3 really strike a chord. They really say something that I think we all deep down, we acknowledge that even the wealth of a nation, the foundation of a nation is built there in the home. And so many of us can look back to our own homes and say, that's where it started for me. That is where my foundation lies. To insinuate even a nation would gauge its strength by the strength of its mothers. That says a whole lot. But, I think we kind of saw this a little bit earlier this year. The news cycle is so quick, we're on to newer things. But I want to remind you of the name Toya Graham. Do y'all remember this lady? When the Baltimore riots were going on and her son was out there taking part in that, acting like a hoodlum, and she runs out there and we have video evidence of her pulling him out of those riots and beating him over the head. And there was kind of a debate, remember, whether or not that was good motherhood. Some people were saying, yes, that's what we've been missing. And others were saying, no, that's not good mothering. But I think the consensus was yes. I mean, if every mother and father was out there doing what she was doing, what a nation, what a difference it would make in our nation. And I know I heard it, her language is not good, maybe she went overboard. I don't know, you can say different things about it. But at the very core of what she stood for was, my son will not be involved in this. And if we could just see that in our homes, boy, we just dream of what a difference it would make in this country. Well, tonight, tonight we come to Hebrews chapter 11, verse 11 through 12, and we're going to talk about a mother who mothered in faith. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 11 through 12. By faith, Sarah herself received power to conceive, even when she was past the age, since she considered him faithful who had promised. Therefore, from one man, and him as good as dead, were born descendants as many as the stars of heaven and as many as the innumerable grains of sand by the seashore. Now, what strikes me as somewhat odd just from the outset on this text is it kind of cuts against the grain of what we knew about Sarah from the Genesis account. Remember when we saw Sarah there learning that she was going to have child, that one image that really sticks in our brain was the fact that she didn't believe it. She had doubts. She laughed in God's face, though she didn't understand that was what she was doing. But you remember in Genesis chapter 18, they come to Abraham there, and Abraham says, we have guests, let's fix them a meal. And so he feeds those guests, not knowing that they were angelic beings. Maybe even the Lord himself was there in those three persons. And so they feed them that meal, and they start to tell Abraham, you're going to have a son. And Sarah, she's around the corner there behind the tent flap, and she starts to laugh to herself. And the angel calls that out. Why did Sarah laugh? And Sarah says, no, I didn't laugh. But the angel says, yes, you did. You did laugh. And that's what we remember from Genesis chapter 18. And this Hebrew text comes along and says she conceived in faith. It sounds contradictory. She did not have faith. She had doubts. I want to remind us of something, though. This is very interesting. Do you remember that Abraham did the exact same thing that Sarah did, and he did it first? We remember Sarah's doubts and the fact that she laughed at God. I want to remind you that before she did, Genesis chapter 17, Abraham did. Starting in verse 15 there. God said to Abraham, as for Sarah, your wife, you shall not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name. I will bless her, and moreover, I will give you a son by her. I will bless her, and she shall become a nation. She shall become nations. Kings of people shall come from her. Then Abraham fell on his face and laughed, and said to himself, shall a child be born to a man who is 100 years old? Shall Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a child? The father of the faithful. The father of the faithful, doing the exact same thing that we criticized Sarah for doing just a chapter later. They both had doubts. They both were unsure about this news here. But this Hebrews 11 text comes along and it tells us by faith she conceived. And the only thing that I'm brought to conclude is the Genesis text doesn't show us the conclusion of the matter. You remember Ecclesiastes, here's the conclusion of the matter. Dale Carnegie says, even God does not supposed to judge a man until his latter days. Why should you and I do any differently? We don't have the conclusion of the matter while we're focusing on Sarah's doubts, but he comes along here in Hebrews chapter 11 and says, I want to tell you something else about her conception. Doubts. We have doubts, don't we? So many ministries began in doubt. Jeremiah, one of the most faithful, persecuted prophets of Israel. Remember how he began his ministry? Lord God, behold, I do not know how to speak, for I'm only a youth. He began in doubts. Gideon, that great judge of the book of Judges, he began in doubts. Please, Lord, how can I save Israel? Behold, my clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I'm the least in my father's house. He had doubts. Moses, this is so prominent in the Bible. We know of Moses' doubts. Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? They had doubts. And so many characters of our Bible, they're not faithful, they're not prominent because they had no doubts. It's because they carried on and they pushed through in spite of doubts. And here we have Sarah. She had doubts. But here's the conclusion of the matter. In spite of her doubts, she pushed forward and she conceived in faith. She considered him faithful who promised. Sarah weighed her doubts against her faith, and that was her conclusion. God is faithful, and she conceived in doubt. Now, mothers, I want to ask you a question. Do you ever have any doubts? I know I've met a couple of mothers. I know some of you. I hear these things. Yes, they're not just young mothers either. Florida Scott Maxwell, she said, no matter how old a mother is, she watches her middle-aged children for signs of improvement. It's not just the young mothers that have doubts. Mothers, do you have doubts? Sure you do. It starts all the way at the beginning. Am I ready to be a mother? Can I even do this? If I have a child, am I going to continue working outside the home, assuming that I work, or am I going to work inside the home? It's still work either way you go, but what am I going to do with that? What's the better choice? What's the best for my family? Am I feeding them right? Am I laying them on the right side? Do I have them turned correctly to sleep? Am I giving the right amount of attention? Am I taking them to the doctor too much or too little? You hate to go time after time and the doctor say there's nothing wrong with this child. He's just got a cold. It'll blow over. You hate to take him and, man, he's had an ear infection for 3 weeks, and why didn't you take him in already? Am I taking them in too much, too little? What school do I put them in? How do I discipline? Should I spank? Should I not spank? Should I let them play sports? If so, which sports? Should I keep them out of certain activities? Am I giving them enough discipline? I want to train up my children to love the Lord and to be faithful to Him. Am I doing what I can do, all that I can possibly do to bring them to that end? I have my own faults and my own flaws, and I can't even keep myself in line, and yet they see that, and how am I going to lead them to the Lord? The Apostle Paul, he throws his hands up and he says, "Wretched man that I am, who will deliver me from this body of sin and death?" But Paul didn't have kids. I've got to deal with that, and I've got to raise my kids at the same time. There's doubts. We've got doubts, don't we? Sarah was a mother with doubts. She said, "I'm too old for this. I'm not able to do this." But look to her conclusion. God is faithful. He is faithful to His promises. And so, whether you're a mother or not tonight, this lesson is kind of for all of us. We all have doubts, don't we? But here's the conclusion we must come to, that God is faithful in spite of our doubts. And I don't count on myself to pull through, but I count on God to pull through no matter what my doubts are. The text begins by telling us Sarah received power to conceive. Now, this word conceive is a very interesting word in the original text. It is in our New Testament 11 times. This is the only time it is ever translated as conceive. All the other times in the New Testament, it's translated as foundation. And coincidentally, it's always found in the phrase foundation of the world. And so when we say that Sarah conceived, we're carrying an idea of laying a foundation. Sarah laid a foundation for a whole nation. She became a cornerstone for the building of God, of which we are now a part. And so she's starting something. But the power of Sarah to accomplish this does not come from within herself. It says she received strength to conceive. She didn't formulate that within herself. She didn't invent this. She received it from outside herself. It was not Sarah's idea to have this child. It was not Sarah and her 90-year-old body that made this process work. It was not her master plan, nor was it Abraham's. She was past the age. Abraham was as good as dead. The text tells us that. They weren't responsible for this. She received the power to work this plan out in her life, and she received it from God. Our community, our world, our church is indebted to godly mothers who stand at the foundation and they build something which the power does not come from within themselves. And much of what they build, they'll never see the fruits of. You understand that phrase that we see as far as we see because we stand on the shoulders of giants. Parents, we know how that feels to be the giant underneath our children's feet, and then under our grandchildren's feet and our great-grandchildren's feet. We build something for them to stand on. We lay a foundation, but it doesn't come from within us. It comes from God. And that's exactly what Paul is talking about in 1 Corinthians 3, verses 9 through 11. He said, "For we are God's fellow workers. You are God's field, God's building. According to the grace of God given to me, like a skilled master builder, I'll lay a foundation, and someone else is building upon it. Let each one take care how he builds upon it, for no one can lay a foundation other than that which is laid, which is Jesus Christ." My heart aches for the many well-intentioned mothers across our country right now who are doing their best, striving to build lives for their children, but they're choosing the wrong foundation on which to do so. Well, what is the correct foundation on which to build our children's lives? Some today are trying to establish their children on the foundation of education. And education is well and good, but it begs the question, education of what? Math, science, philosophy, English, all these things, they prepare a path for success in the next 50 years, but in eternity, will these things be the foundation that take our children into eternity? No, education is not the foundation, as good as education is. There are some today trying to establish their children on the foundation of financial security, and this goes right to what we've been talking about for these last 3 weeks. Money equates to stuff and services and security, and we need money in this life, so to speak. It's just a necessary tool to operate in this world. But is it a foundation? No, no, no. We see time and time again that, what does Paul say? He talks about the uncertainty of riches. These riches are uncertain. They are not a foundation to be stood upon. Some today trying to establish their children on the foundation of accomplishment. My child is the fastest. My child is the strongest. My child is the smartest. And it's usually not true when they say it. But even if they are, even if your child does attain to the pinnacle of accomplishment, they are the strongest. They are the smartest. There's only one way to go from the top, and it's not up. What accomplishment will not take them. It's not the foundation they need to succeed in eternity. And we certainly wouldn't want to tell our children, you have to accomplish something to be a somebody. That's not what God says. These are not foundations. Sarah received strength to lay a foundation. She received it from God. And thank God for our mothers who built us up, not on the foundations of this world, but upon the foundation that stands eternally, and that being Jesus Christ. Our text ends in verse 12. Therefore, from one man, and him as good as dead, were born descendants as many as the stars of heaven and as many as the innumerable grains of sand by the seashore. From this one mother's faith, Abraham was enabled to be what Abraham was, to be the progenitor of the faith. For all those who would follow, he began that household that culminated in Jesus Christ and transitioned into the church that we have today. We still stand in this household as we speak. There's even we could even have a whole other lesson right here. We've been talking about mothers and parenting and what we build for our children. What Sarah did in her marital relationship, being a godly mother, enabled her husband to be a godly father. And you see that as well in our families. That when we fulfill our responsibility in the family, those others in the family are also enabled to fulfill their responsibilities to God and to the family. But can you conceive of a nation that we would have if we just had more Sarahs? Those who built on the foundation of God. If every mother and father in our church, and I'm talking about God's nation now, if every mother and father in God's nation decided to do this, I'm going to push through whatever doubts I have, and I'm going to build upon the foundation of God. His promises are sure. And I have doubts, but I know that His promises are sure, and I can stand on them if I will lay the foundation for something that's truly great. If every mother and father would make that decision, what kind of church would we have? What kind of nation would we have that housed a church like that was reaching out and teaching the world to act in such a manner? It's a nation that God dreamt of when He said to Abraham, I will make you a great nation. That's the kind of nation that He was talking about. So God give us godly homes such that we may build this kind of a nation. Let the church have good mothers, and she will have good sons. If you're here this afternoon and you're up against doubts as to whether you could really live such a Christian life as this, if you could really live for Christ or not, I encourage you to look to the example of Sarah. This 90-year-old woman called to believe the incredible notion that she was going to have a baby. How incredible to be asked to believe something such as that, and yet she weighed her options. Well, this is ludicrous, but how much more ludicrous it is to not believe in the promises of God. After all that I've seen from my God, it would be more ludicrous not to believe in His promises. And if you're here tonight and you're thinking, how ludicrous to think that I could change, that I could be that I could live the Christian life, take a look at this God and what He has done and what He will do. And I think you will find that it is more ludicrous not to believe that He can and will fulfill His promises. If you're here tonight and you need to come to Him for the first time, if you need to become a Christian and give your life to Him, I encourage you to do so. If you're here tonight and you are a Christian and yet something has come and stood between you and your God, you have a sin in your life, you have something that is limiting you in the way that you can serve Him, if there's anything that you need to turn back from to repent, please come while we stand and while we sing.
When we walk